Well, okay, welcome college football fans. My name is Peter Schmitz, and to my left is my son Alex Schmitz.
Hello.
And this is the inaugural podcast that we're going to try to start today. Today is June 3rd of 2015. Ironically, the day of a major tornado in the town that I grew up in many, many years ago.
Oh, really?
June 3rd, 1980. Yep. And anybody that knows that date might be from my town. We'll get to that later. But the purpose of our podcast is we're going to call it the College Football Throwdown. What we're really wanting to do, though, is to just talk college football, to record, if you will, the conversations that we have historically had over the years as father and son, both sharing a passion for the football, the sport of college football. So a little bit about who we are, I guess, would be in order since this is the first one.
That's right.
Why don't you, well, you know what, I'll go ahead and go first and then I'll let you go. I've been a college football fan since the late 1960s. I hail from the small town of Grand Island, Nebraska, and so of course I am a Husker fan. And also we currently reside in the beautiful town of Traverse City, Michigan, way up in northern regions of Michigan, right along the beautiful Lake Michigan. So that's something that has influenced us a little bit, is that distance away from Nebraska. Distance sometimes makes the heart grow fonder, and I've been a passionate fan my whole life and never lost that. So what we hope to accomplish is to do a number of things, both about college football as a sport nationally, but also to talk about things related to my passion, which is Nebraska football, a Big Ten conference, other conferences, to really try to make this a broad-reaching thing. Alex, tell us a little bit about you.
All right. Well, I grew up here in this home hearing nothing but Nebraska football for my whole life.
So you're saying you've been brainwashed?
A little bit, but it was a good type of brainwashing, So growing up in Michigan, going to school in Michigan, I was the only one in class who rooted for Nebraska instead of, U of M or MSU, when the big football games, or Notre Dame, when the big football games came around. But I've grown to appreciate college football. I don't follow it nearly as closely as this guy does, but I like to watch the games, watch the national championships when that comes around. Bowl season's always a good time to catch the national games. And I just recently graduated from college at Ohio University as a film major. And while I was there, I did over 70 podcasts of my own, an anime podcast called Shredded Cells, which is one of my other big interests. So I'm kind of showing my dad the ropes here on how to do this whole podcasting thing.
Exactly.
So we're going to see how this goes.
You're the technical brains, and I'm hoping to bring a little historic perspective on the sport that we both love to enjoy together. So that's kind of a neat thing. And so one of the things that we would like to do is just kind of outline how we hope that these podcasts might go over time. Now, the expectation is it's going to be a rare opportunity that Alex and I will be together in the same room like we are today. He happens to be just arriving back from college and has not yet embarked on the next phase of his life, so we're lucky enough to be able to do it together. But eventually we will be doing this on a regular basis, I think, from different locations. And the hope would be that down the road we will also be able to bring others into the podcast, both friends of ours that share our passion for the sport, and we'll bring perspectives of different teams, different eras, that sort of thing. So I really do hope we can, eventually get to all of those things. But as a general rule, how do we want to line this thing up? Well, one of the reasons why we're choosing to do this right now is we're together, number one. Number two, we're within that 100-day time frame of the next football season. The 2015-2016 season is upon us in many regards. What we're going to be seeing is the conference media days are really not too far away. The meetings are happening now. The media days will be happening, and then before you know it, it'll be early August, and the pads will start to pop, and we'll be getting all geeked and excited. Now, how do we want to structure this? I think the way I would like to see it go, Alex, is that we would typically talk about national type of issues, so things that are going on across the landscape of college football, and then kind of hone in, as if you will, from there down into conference type discussions, ultimately some Big Ten lean and that kind of discussion, and then certainly spend a good bit of time on the Huskers as well, because obviously I'm not going to shy away from full disclosure here that I am a rabid Cornhusker fan, but I'd like to think that I have a pretty good perspective on the national scene. I certainly have strong opinions about how I think the sport should move forward from here, and that sort of thing. And that's where I'm hoping maybe we'll eventually get some listeners, and they'll want to chime in, and they'll appreciate maybe some of the perspectives that we bring, and want to argue with us every now and then as well. That's where the college football throwdown comes in. Our goal is to actually evolve into a bit of a website that focuses on some fun comparisons down the road, where we would take things. The first example that I can think of, and again, I'm going to use my Husker bias here, is the example of what are the two best punt returns ever in college football. And then put those side by side, kind of put descriptions up of what transpired, what led up to that, what were the circumstances of the event, of the punt return, that sort of thing. And of course, from my perspective, the Johnny the Jet Rogers punt return in the Oklahoma game, the game of the century back in the early 70s, was one that will always live with me. And so that's one I love. But there are so many others, and I would love to do comparisons like that.
Yeah. Well, when you said that, the first thing I thought of was doing one of those things where they pit, the 1995 Huskers against, one of the preeminent Michigan teams, or whatever, from two totally different eras, and say, okay, who would win? Do some voting battle thing.
Right. Now, another thing that I wanted to make sure that we kind of included in this podcast is that obviously you always have to have certain signature things. I don't know whether it will ultimately be music or certain phrases or certain topics or whatever that we cover every time. But one thing that I thought would be appropriate is that oftentimes when we are having these discussions, I am enjoying a cold beverage. And so I thought it would be appropriate for me to include that noise at the beginning of every podcast, so that that would be a known quantity of every step in this future.
There you go. One beer for every podcast
there
episode.
You go. Well, at least one.
We're not going to limit ourselves here.
That's right. So with regard to what we wanted to talk about on this initial podcast, obviously we're working out the bugs here. Mr. Technical Guy will be doing that. But with less than 100 days to go, it's like, where are we at in the preparation for the season, that sort of thing. And a few topics that tend to be hitting the mainstream right now are things like issues with regard to satellite camps that are occurring throughout the country right now, where college football teams are allowed to travel to other states and engage in relationships with high school, a local high school, or a small college to share their facilities, and that therefore those facilities or those organizations obviously reap money because they pay rent, and in exchange for that, then they can invite local talent to come to that location, say in Louisiana or Texas or Georgia or Florida, and go where a lot of athletes are and be able to host a camp. So, for example, the University of Nebraska is hosting satellite camps throughout the South and Southeast this year, and also other teams are doing the same. Particularly, a lot of the Big Ten schools are making a big emphasis to do that. Jim Harbaugh has gotten some attention at Michigan for doing that as well, but a number of schools are doing it. Out west, a few schools have already been doing this for a while in the Pac-12. It's completely legal according to the rules of the NCAA, but there are some people, obviously those who are in the South already, who aren't too in favor of
Right.
that.
Well, coming from the Nebraska perspective, this actually seems like a good thing for us because this allows us to, get into other states, to find new talent because we can't get all of our players from the state of Nebraska like some schools can in their respective states.
And some people will probably, who listen to this podcast, may think that I'm beating the dead horse on that. But yes, that is a topic that I will probably bring up a number of times. Is the challenges really that you face as a school with less population around you versus the schools that have a greater population around them, and what you can do to overcome the deficit that represents. It is just a fact, and you have to figure out how are you going to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think that this whole concept of satellite camps, there's a lot of objection to it because people don't like the intrusion into their area, if you will. But I would say that I believe it comes hand in hand with some other things. And if they ended up ultimately outlawing satellite camps because there is some opposition to them, I would hope that it would also bring up some other key elements of discussion on the issues of college football. If you're going to eliminate the satellite camps, then we need to be talking about some other key inequities that exist in college football structure right now, particularly as it relates to recruiting. And if you're going to limit the ability of a team from a less populous state or a state that has less access to the kinds of athletes that make up the premier athletes playing the sport of football, then let's do some things that help level that playing field just a little bit. For example, the idea that you cannot currently have official visits until the beginning of a student's senior year. So that does not allow remote schools like a Nebraska or an Iowa or any of the schools that are in more remote areas to bring players in from all over the country and pay for those students, to come in, and their parents. It's very important that their parents be able to come so that they can experience that relationship. You get into an area, and this is not a north-south thing. This is about proximity to athletes and proximity to population. As an example, if you live in Toledo, Ohio, you could visit the University of Michigan, Michigan State, and Notre Dame all within a couple of days or a couple of weekends, and it's not much of a financial burden for your parents to be able to go with you to spend time on those three campuses. To analogize that to a place like Nebraska, there is not nearly the population available for them to come into that convenient, let's call it, 200 or 300 mile radius of the campus. Now, it would be ideal if a smaller school like Nebraska with lower population had that opportunity. So that's just one of the examples. And I would love dialogue like that to be going on to try to help balance that inequity, especially if they're worrying about satellite camps.
Right. There certainly are bigger issues to be addressed than the satellite camps. I think you could certainly build the argument for that. I was sort of wondering, when you talk about official visits, those are visits where you pay, the school pay for the travel of the family and all that. Is there anything else different about those visits in terms of like the coaches being there to guide the player through the campus, or versus like a visit where, Joe Schmo who lives down the street from U of M goes to, visit? Like, is there any difference in terms of the experience they would get?
There is definitely a difference between a official visit and an unofficial visit in terms of some of the rules, some of the things you can and can't do. But there's an awful lot that you can do on an unofficial visit. Enough so that's why this whole process, as the recruiting process has accelerated, it is becoming more prevalent that some of the best players in the country every year make their evaluation process and commit to a school and start building a relationship with that school way earlier than it historically has happened. And as a result, before we, as a smaller school with less population even have the opportunity to invite a player, say, from Georgia or Florida or Louisiana to fly with their family to Lincoln to evaluate the University of Nebraska and what it offers. They don't even get that opportunity until after the school year started. And by then, frankly, many of them have already made up their mind, or they're well on their way to building the relationships because they've been able to visit these other campuses that are in greater proximity to themselves many, many times. Mm-hmm. And now that television is a fairly equitable thing, where almost everyone who is at a major a Big Five conference school already has excessive exposure on television, there's just not as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a key issue, I think, for schools like us. And if we're going to be talking about equity, it's things like that and things like oversigning, where some differences exist between the conferences and how they interpret or allow signing to occur as far as the number of scholarship athletes that can be signed. Everybody follows the same rules with regard to the number of scholarships that they can ultimately have on their team as of August 1st or 2nd or 3rd, whenever they start fall camp. In fact, I think the actual official rule has to do not even with fall camp, but with the start of school. So it's really crazy, the variations that exist between the different conferences. And I think that those conferences need to get together and have some discussions that would lead to more of a consistent rule. And the reality is that there is disagreement on that. The Big Ten, for example, has a much more stringent set of rules on that because they want to protect the student athlete, whereas so they go above and beyond what the letter of the law of the NCAA requires. And as such, frankly, the Big Ten is putting themselves at a great disadvantage in the recruiting game. Now, that's a choice the Big Ten's making. They could choose to liberalize their rules and follow rules that some of the other conferences do that give them a little bit more flexibility for managing rosters. But fundamentally, there are some real issues about what's the right thing to do for the student athlete and what's fair to the kids. And that's where the debate needs to happen, and it needs to be something that I think is very out in the open, very much transparent. That because I think a lot of times some of these bad examples that you hear, those things could be avoided, and those young people and their parents need to be educated about what they're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's the whole debate about them being student athletes versus them being NFL athletes in training, as it were.
Absolutely. And a lot of people will like to have the debate about the hypocrisy of college athletics at the highest level. And certainly that's a debate that's worth having. There are issues with that, but I'm a believer. I still hold to the ideal, a little bit of the purist, you might say. So anyway, that's kind of the way I view it, and we'll get into greater detail about that in future podcasts, I think. Mm-hmm. Conference games. How many conference games? That's a big discussion right now. There are differences between the different conferences as to how many conference games they play. And some have an argument that there should be more conference games. Others choose to have less. As long as you have those variations, it makes it very difficult to do an effective comparison between the different. What am I trying to say? I'm losing it.
Well, it's
between the different conferences,
because teams tend to schedule their non-conference schedule with relatively weak teams,
except for maybe one tougher opponent,
right? Especially since those games are usually at the beginning of the year before the conference season starts, so you want to get off to not the most difficult start on game one. There are exceptions to that rule, of course, but like I know there was some pushback against the Big Ten going to 10. Did they go from 8 to 9 or 9 to 10?
8 to 9.
8 to 9 conference games, and some coaches were upset about that.
Well, and there are other coaches from other conferences who didn't do that, who have been very vocal. Even Nick Saban, for example, at Alabama, would like very much to go to 9. but his conference, the SEC, chose not to go to 9. They chose to stay at 8. I actually think that unless everybody's going to 9 or 10 or some number, I think it's a huge advantage to stay at 8. The fewer conference games you have, the enhances your ability to schedule wins. And ultimately, if you're not beating each other up, then your overall conference records are going to look more attractive. Mm-hmm. If you are playing conference games, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. So the number of wins and losses, you're adding losses to your conference as a whole. For example, in the non-conference slate, like you pointed out, oftentimes the opponents aren't always the most challenging. And so it's not uncommon to watch a given conference, for example, the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, any of the Big 5 there, any of those conferences on a given week in the fall will probably go like 80% victories, mm-hmm. where 80% of the teams or more win their non-conference games, right? So then fast forward to conference week. When you're playing a conference, it's 50-50. 50 win, 50 lose, right? So it's a very different set of circumstances. And so at the end of the year, all of a sudden you have more teams with that third or fourth loss because you played an extra conference game. So I would rather see that be consistent. I understand the philosophy of wanting to play your conference brethren as much as possible. That makes the fight for the conference championship more legitimate. The more games you're playing against each other, you're really deciding who is the best among that group, right? Mm-hmm. And so I prefer that, but it's hard. I mean, I understand why people stay at 8. There's money involved. There's funding of programs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The debate I would throw back at that though is that overall it probably hurts your overall the overall view of your conference because, like you said, you're beating up on each other, for one more week of games.
Right.
But if a team rises out of that, and has won all but one of their conference games, and like wins their conference champion, and like they're in the conversation for the national championship. And with this new system of the national championship conference or committee.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the committee.
Yes,
yeah, right. The college football championship committee.
The committee would definitely, I think, would look at two different schools who had gone through won their conference champions, but if this guy had won 9 games of his conference championship, as the other one had won 8 within his conference, maybe that gives him a bit of an edge in the strength of schedule battle. Maybe,
but there's more to it than just that. I mean that's going to affect 4 teams every year because we have a 4-team playoff. Now, what about all the other teams as they're lining up to align themselves with bowl games? And all of a sudden, a bowl game is looking at a 10-2 SEC team versus a 9-3 Pac-12 team, and trying to decide which team they're going to invite to their bowl game. Well, because the Pac-12 team played an extra conference game, you think they're going to get credit for that, or are they going to go with the team that won 10 games and is ranked higher because the human rankings still are going to put favor in teams that lose fewer games. That is a reality of that voting process.
Mm-hmm. It's true, and in that sort of situation, it would obviously depend on like the margin of loss, and how tough the extra team they played was, et cetera, et cetera. But
right.
But it becomes a debate about that. Then, like, I have 3 losses, but does the fact that I played a tougher schedule, hypothetically, than the 10-win team mean I still deserve to play? So it's an interesting debate.
It is. And so those are some things that hopefully we'll be able to discuss over these next podcasts, and as well as others. And if we ever, again, start to get some people who listen to this thing and want to send in a question, we're going to have to get ourselves an email so that people can go to that. Actually, one that I can give you right now would be huskerpete13@gmail.com. huskerpete13@gmail.com. You wonder why I have the number 13 in there? It's because I'm the 13th child in my family. So we are used to having debates and arguments in a family of that size. So if you're here out there in the internet world, in the Google universe, then give us a shout.
In the tubes of the interwebs.
That's right. So that kind of covers a little bit of some of the things, and obviously we'll go far afield from those topics. But the idea would be to enter into some interesting discussion and debate about how we can both improve the sport as well as maybe address some of the inequities that exist in how we go about selecting our champion and the other significant winners, if you will, of the college football landscape. And that goes all the way to the whole issue of conference championship games, which is another topic that I'm very fond of,
yes.
and we will talk about at length over time. Now, we also will talk a little bit about the Big Ten Conference, and obviously that is the conference that our favorite team is in, but it's also, I think there are implications to all the conferences across the country, and I think we'll be able to enter into a number of very interesting and insightful discussions about the differences between the conferences and the decisions that they make, and maybe where their motivations come from, as well as looking at maybe the impact or the history of what happened after certain decisions were made. And that's where I hope to be able to bring a little bit of perspective, because I've been following this sport fairly closely, like I said, since the late 1960s, in the late era of Bob Devaney at Nebraska, and when we were just emerging as a bit of a national power. Right. So there's a lot of history there. And then ultimately, we'll filter down from the Big Ten Conference into talk about the Huskers specifically, and our opponents, our fans, that sort of thing. We'll try to do that too. So we're going to hit it at a bunch of different levels and see what people think, and as well put a little recording of posterity, or for posterity, of our own conversations and debate.
That's right.
So, but back to the Big Ten Conference for just a little bit. As we look at the division of the schools and that sort of stuff, there's been a great deal of conversation about the relative strengths of East versus West in the Big Ten. And I share some of the concerns that have been voiced by a number of people about that. And we had the Legends and the Leaders division, which was designed and created not for geographic convenience, but in an effort to try to put a balance to the strengths of the two conferences, or divisions of the conference.
The historical powerhouses.
Yeah. And I believe that would have done a pretty good job of creating that balance. I thought that they had accomplished that, even though geographically it wasn't obvious, right? Mm-hmm. But now we've moved beyond that, partially because there was such a gross criticism from the national media. This is another topic I probably should mention, is that not always a big fan of the national media and their perspective. I believe that they often bring such an incredible bias to what they discuss and how they discuss it. And now there's a difference here. I'm going to bring a bias, but I'm going to admit to that bias up front, and I'm going to share everything with full disclosure of that bias. What frustrates me, and what I will argue against quite regularly, is the fact that so often we have some real powerhouses in the media, and those powerhouses, both in written and the television and radio media, all tend to proclaim a certain objectivity about the sport that I believe is totally false. And I just wish that those entities and individuals would be more willing to raise their hand and admit their biases, so that the debate could be argued transparently, with those biases recognized and acknowledged.
Yeah. Well, it almost kind of reminds me of like movie reviewers. We talk about there being objective criticism in film and things like that. But the reality of the matter is that no one film critic is totally objective about what they say and do. Everyone's going to come with their own personal biases. Just the movies that they've seen, their particular tastes, is going to influence what they think about a movie or whatever. And they can take a certain amount of that out of their thoughts, and try to be more objective, but a certain amount of relativistic opinion is never going to be lost. So and the same could be said for like video game reviews, anything like that. So what I always try to do is I try to seek out like multiple opinions on, a movie or a video game, or, even in, actual news like Fox, CNN. It's good to get multiple perspectives from the different stations on an issue,
right,
so that you can get understand that each of them are coming with a bias, and then maybe from all those multiple sources you can find something that is more close to being that objective truth.
Well, and that's
similarly with the sportscasters. If you listen
right,
to a bunch of different people who have they have differing opinions,
right,
and views on the sport, then you might come to something that gives you a more broader understanding of the subject.
Right, and obviously you can do that, but in the game or in the sport of football, I would suggest to you that there's two things. One, when people come to you with this attitude and perspective that claims or appears to claim objectivity, like obviously we're speaking for the national view of a certain issue or a certain school or whatever, I would rather they admit their biases. And this goes to biases relative to the actual media product, i.e. major players like ESPN, who are blatantly guilty of promoting their product, whatever they're covering, and diminishing that which is being broadcast on other stations, which is so sad because I was able to enjoy the birth of ESPN and to observe its growth. And in its early years, it was just a bunch of people who were passionate about the sport or sports in general, and they were genuinely willing to cover anything and everything objectively because they had very little product that they owned the rights to, other than like the tree cutting contests in the Pacific Northwest and things like that. So, but in this day and age, I wish they would acknowledge some of the clear biases that show up in their coverage and where they spend their time in their conversation, which they claim it's because this is what people are interested in, when it's really not about that. It's about these are the major games that we're covering this week, or this is the major conferences that we have deep financial relationships with, and therefore we're going to promote them, as opposed to it truly being, oh, we're doing this just because it's popular to talk about. Because they beat a lot of dead horses. I mean, beat them to death. And it's absurd, and it's not about this is what people want to talk about. There's so many other things that true fans like myself, and I think many, many millions of other fans who love the sport, would rather talk about. But they choose to define the debate because they're quite a powerful force. Now, I will admit similarly that organizations such as the Big Ten Network, the SEC Network, the new Pac-12 series of networks are all equally biased, if you will. It's just that I think the conferences tend to be a little more honest about their bias as opposed to ESPN and Fox and NBC Sports and some of these other organizations. So that's kind of my take on that in a nutshell.
Our media sidetrack there.
There we go.
Tangent.
Okay, we got to do one more of these. Was that a little too loud?
A little too loud.
Well, you'll take care of that, Mr. Technology Guy.
I'll work on it.
Okay. So
we were talking about the division of the Big Ten.
Yeah, we were talking about the division of the Big Ten. And bottom line with that is I'm disappointed as a Nebraska fan, because one of the things I was most excited about when we made the decision to leave our historic relationships with the original Big 8 schools, going back even to the Big 6, when we chose to leave that, one of the things I could hang my hat on and be excited about was that I was moving in, or we were moving into, a conference that was going to lead us into relationships with some great traditional powers, and we were going to be able to reestablish some of those kinds of marquee games and environments. And we aren't able to do that now because all of a sudden we've divided ourselves geographically, and we've been put into a division that clearly does not have the cachet of the other side of the division. And Nebraska's been there and done that with the Big 12 North and Big 12 South. When we did that division, Texas successfully arranged for that division to occur and for the long-standing great rivalry of Oklahoma-Nebraska to become diminished to the point where it was a shell of its former self because of that division and the fact that we didn't play every year, and it was no longer towards the end of the season when it was the most significant. So I'm very disappointed that we then, after just a short couple of years in the Big Ten, find ourselves in a very similar situation. Now, there's a positive side that many people would place on this, and that positive side says, well, you don't have those perennial powers to fight against to get to the division championship. And there's truth in that. There's absolutely truth in that. But I would argue that to be able to recruit, you have to be able to claim and invite student athletes that if you come to our university, you're going to be regularly playing in the venues that people grow up dreaming about, right? Like the Big House, like Ohio State's Memorial Stadium. I mean, those are big deals. Penn State's Beaver Stadium, big deals. Okay, those are nationally relevant games in the iconic history of the sport, right? We don't have that ability to claim that we're going to be able to do that every year. Now, will it still happen with some frequency? Absolutely. But if you're a premier athlete who has all the choices, everybody wants you, okay? And one school's saying you're going to be able to go to Ohio State Stadium once, or we'll play Ohio State, but we're going to play them in Lincoln, and then we'll never get the return trip because the schedule in your 4 years doesn't accommodate that. Or you don't get to see it at all because it's not even on the schedule for 4 years.
Although, on the other hand, and this might be a recruiting tactic that we'll have to wait and see on because we need to develop more years within this new division.
Right.
But you could bring the argument to the fact that, yes, we're in the less strong division, but as a result of that, we play a relatively weaker conference schedule compared to those other teams, and thus we're able to make it to the Big Ten championship games more often, for the past
Correct.
X number of years. Nebraska's been to that national championship game. Now, have we won it every time? Maybe not.
Right.
But the point is, I can get you to the Big Ten championship
Right.
and to play for those big games, potential recruit.
Exactly. And that is exactly the message that Nebraska and the other Western Division teams are going to have when they're in that discussion. I think the strategy that Nebraska appears to be employing right now is actually probably the better strategy, or one of the best strategies that they could, which is to truly focus on the message of playing at Nebraska and within the Big Ten Conference collectively. And they're targeting areas, frankly, that are not heavily dosed in the Big Ten footprint. Now, in the early years of the Big Ten Conference affiliation for Nebraska, we were heavy in the Big Ten footprint. We were going after a lot of players from Ohio because of our coach's, Bo Pelini's, history there, being a Youngstown native and playing at Ohio State. He had connections, so there you go. So, but bottom line is now we are tending to focus on more of a national footprint as well as a local focus on our own 500-mile radius, which I think is actually the right strategy for Nebraska to make, given the setup of the two divisions. It's our only choice, frankly.
Right. Well, and our new coach, I assume he's bringing in quite a few ties from the Pac-12 as well, like some West Coast talent that he could draw from.
Yes, West Coast, Texas, and the coaching staff has a number of connections, but we're not diving in to the Big Ten footprint and hanging our hat on recruiting Ohio, for example, right along elbow to elbow with every recruit with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, etc. We're just not. We're gonna target those areas, but it's not going to be our bell cow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the right thing. It's frankly the only choice we have. I would have preferred that if we had a more equitable divisional setup, we could do that. But I'm going to go back to a point you made. It's one thing to win your division and play in that championship game, but if you are always getting your ass kicked in that game, that's a problem.
Which is the problem we had in the Big 12 for a number of years.
Well, not that we were getting our ass kicked, because those games were all close, but the bottom line was there was a string of years in which the Big 12 South began to win every single one of those games. And similarly, I could see that evolving in this Big 10 setup where when we look back 6, 7, 8 years from now, how many times is a team from the Big 10 West, whether it's Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, any of the teams that you might now consider on the higher end of that division, playing against Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, or Michigan, how often are they going to play that game and win? Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen that often. And so if that starts to go on a string where it all leans to one side, then all of a sudden the premier recruiting, that separation, it gets worse.
Yeah.
Or better if you're already on the east side.
Which is why Nebraska needs to make a quick turnaround here with this new coach and win that game one time. And then we'll have a genuine argument.
And if we can successfully do that and continue to invest in these fertile recruiting areas that are not necessarily part of the Big Ten footprint, then I think we'll be in great shape.
Mm-hmm. So, all right.
Anyway, so there's a little dalliance of things. Do you have something anything that you would want to ask or throw into this thing?
No, I thought this was a pretty good pilot episode of College Football Throwdown. We did get to the Nebraska-specific discussion, but I think we could save that for the next one.
I think that we can. And it's interesting. There'll be so many topics that come up, and I hope that those of you who might listen to this enjoy the conversation and give us a shout. I'm going to say it one more time. HuskerPete13@gmail.com. HuskerPete13@gmail.com. Give us a shout. Thanks for listening.
All right. See you later.
Go Big Red.
Woohoo!